When does a baby learn to crawl? When do you suppose a baby learns to crawl? Any ideas? What's that? When they're ready. My friend Arlene says when they want to reach for something. It's all about motivation. Actually, a baby is born knowing how to crawl. They just can't because gravity gets them down. They don't have the muscle mass to move around in gravity. They can in water, like in the womb, and any woman who's ever had a baby will tell you that they do flip around and kick and do all kinds of things and move quite well. Recent research shows babies being held over moving dots. Hold them over a projection of black dots that move along, and as they hold these babies, practically newborns, over these moving dots attached to some monitors that track their movement, they begin doing this with their limbs, all four of their limbs. They start crawling. It's amazing. Well, the researcher who did this research wasn't satisfied with that alone. She knew that needed to be replicated in other ways, so developed this device called the crawl skate. It's basically a skateboard designed to hold a newborn and Velcro them in so they don't fall off. And I watched this 2-day-old baby on an exam table scoot across the entire exam table crawling. It was amazing. Babies was a recent documentary that aired on Netflix. It was wonderful pandemic watching because you can't help but smile when you're watching babies. At least I can't. The documentary followed the first year of a dozen babies marking their development and delving into the most recent research that's being done on early human development. Better understand our lives as humans when we're first out. Another fun fact, and this should let every new parent off the hook, babies do not develop a sleep pattern until they're 1 year old. Yeah, you can force them into a sleep pattern. Try it. But how many parents have you ever heard said, well, she was sleeping so well for the last month, and we got her to sleep at this time, and it was working, and then suddenly she's not doing it anymore? Well, her brain isn't quite ready for that. And it won't be until she's 1 year old that it's going to settle in. So instead of telling parents what they need to do about getting the baby to sleep, let's cut them some slack, do something practical, and offer to watch the kid while they take a nap. What we cling to as true often turns out to be something different. That's the nature of growing up. Like when I was 7 and I turned off the radio and they stopped talking completely. I knew they weren't talking anymore. And then I turned the radio back on and I knew they were talking again. Guess what? They were talking when I turned off the radio too. But I didn't know that. That's part of growing up and learning. And learning is critical for our survival. So it absolutely befuddles me how people cling to what they think is true, simply because, well, that's the way I learned it, or that was generally accepted practice when I grew up, or this is what I know. I call that lazy brain. I just call it lazy brain. And I'm guilty of lazy brain. It is also a human desire, very human desire, for certainty. That desire is also dangerous. It has bludgeoned and buried countless victims of dogma and doctrine that was violently enforced as if truth, or at least someone's version of truth, was weaponized. Truth gets weaponized. The only thing of which I am mostly certain, which I can claim to be true, is love, particularly the love of God, and more specifically, the love of God that I am learning and coming to know in Jesus, whom we call the Christ. It is a tragedy that this very love has been abused by so-called purveyors of truth, turning the good news of God's love into a horror story for many. Like the Spanish Inquisition. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition, for my Monty Python fans out there. Muslims and Jews just annihilated during this Spanish Inquisition. Women and homosexuals just killed, burned at the stake during the witch pogroms of the Middle Ages. And then there's the history of North America, all because someone's idea of truth justified their behavior in their own mind. This passage from Ephesians is in part an attempt to provide some guidelines for community life, guardrails, if you will, for helping the community keep from venturing into disruptive and destructive behavior that would put community life at peril. For instance, speak the truth to our neighbors. Well, what is the truth? Now you've got me thinking about, well, what is truth, Julie? Well, maybe what the writer is saying, don't pass on stuff that you have heard may or may not be true, may or may not be kind. Think before you speak, right? Be angry, but don't let it get you into trouble. It's okay to be mad about something, but don't stew on it, or it will stew and stir you into something else, and I know what that feels like, and it doesn't feel good. Thieves, stop being thieves. That would really help community morale if you'd stop doing that. And thieves come in all kinds of guises, right? They're not just hunkered down at night stealthily. Oh, no, sometimes they're out in the bright light of day wearing suits and ties. So thieves, stop being thieves. And in fact, work honestly, not only for yourselves, but work so you can share what you have with people who are needy. It's not all about you. Look not to your own interests, as it says in Philippians. Refrain from speaking evil. Only let out of your mouth what builds up, what offers grace to people who can hear you. And don't grieve the Holy Spirit. What might that mean? Can you make God cry? I don't know. Can you imagine the tears God may shed over the unrequited love that she experiences, being ignored? Imitate God. Really, imitate God as beloved children? Yeah, imitate God as beloved children and live in love. It all comes down to love, really. Live in love. The orthodoxy of love, not a set of answers, not certainties, love. I recently read a story about Martin Luther. You know, the guy who inadvertently started a new church by disagreeing with what was being peddled as truth by the powers and principality of the church as it was in his day. He remembered his time as a young student in Erfurt, where this large apron-clothed butcher ran out of his shop one day, chasing him and several other boys who'd been peering through the window into his shop. And this butcher was running after them furiously, waving a string of sausages. And they ran in the opposite direction because they thought that he was angry at them. Turns out he wanted to give them away, these sausages. He wanted to give these little boys sausages. Figured they were hungry. But they mistook his enthusiasm for anger. All of his life, Luther had feared an angry, demanding God, only to find out and discover that in the end, God had been wanting to love and forgive him all the time, all along, and maybe even had a string of sausages for him. Who knows? Instead of running away from an angry and demanding God, what I witness most people doing is they're completely unaware that God is even interested in them. Or like Mike said last week, a lot of people don't even know they have a soul. Don't even know they have a soul. And then a lot of us inside the faith community, well, we keep ourselves distracted enough, just enough, with all manner of things so as to avoid God altogether. God is an unrequited lover, longing for us to turn aside from what we've imagined church to be, or faith to be, or spirituality, and simply notice the holy that's all around us and even within us. Moments of, you've had them, right? Whether it's watching that little baby scoot across in that crawl skate, that was amazing. There's a sense of sacred in that. Or sitting at the ocean, at the beach, listening and watching the waves rhythmically come in and go out. Or listening to the flowing stream in a Sierra mountain. All kinds of, maybe even sitting in a sanctuary. And you had a moment of where you felt open to the sacred. And the sacred met you where you were. Why not linger there? Why not practice the memory of that and live more and more from that love that longs to meet us? God is simply waiting for you to taste what James Finley calls the mystical depth of simple things. Taste the mystical depth of simple things. What are we waiting for? An engraved invitation? This is where you will find and experience true love. I believe it is only from this love that we can hope to become human, fully human. It is only from this love that we can hope to be the heart of Christ for our own lives and in the world to which we are called to serve. It's what we're called to be and do. This is true. It really all comes down to love. Being vulnerable to love means putting ourselves in places and practices, situations among people who help us stumble into God. I've been reading a book called Backpacking with the Saints by Belden Lane, and he writes this: the core discernment for Rumi, who's a Sufi mystic, is not, what should I do? People are asking, what should I do with my life all the time? No, for Rumi it is what is expected. Instead of what is expected of me is, what do I love? What do I love? Because what we love shapes us more than anything else. The object of our longing and loving, our desire, that's what shapes us. Jesus invites us to be shaped by the love of God and the love of neighbor. It all comes down to love. St. Benedict wrote, "Prefer nothing to the love of Christ. Bear witness to our own mystical presence through this love." And the church is meant to help us go into the world with a Christ-like heart and bring that heart into the world with us. It's like Austin Channing, lost her last name. Austin Channing Brown wrote, "I need a love that is troubled by injustice." That kind of love. The truth is, this love is already yours. Thomas Merton tells us, you just need to let yourself experience what you already possess. You already have it. Your part in it is to practice finding God, turning to the love that is not letting you go. Your part is discovering what you already have, that this love is a truth. And we all can hold back, unfortunately, from claiming it. We grow accustomed to listening to voices that demean us and demean others. We get accustomed to voices that tear down and not build up. And the true voice, then, of the one who calls us beloved becomes increasingly muted. Let's instead create an ethos, an environment where we can hear more clearly the voice of the beloved. Let's create that community, that world. And maybe this is what the writer of Ephesians was trying to get at. Let us also then imitate God and live in love. Amen.